whatever decision you make is not wrong, right? Like it's just, you make whatever decision you make. And if that is the path that you decide to take, then, we are very lucky to live in a time when we have the technology to pursue parenthood, even with fertility struggles. Like it's an incredible, incredible thing. And, when I said earlier, like I felt like a science experiment, like in some ways that was really cool. Like it was really cool to be like, oh my God, like someone who lived 100 years ago could never have experienced something like this. It's really, really incredible. But it's also a very big toll on your body, your mind, your relationships, and it's something that needs to be considered very carefully.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. When we struggle with this kids or child-free decision, it is so easy for us to just get totally immersed in the decision itself and forget that sometimes we can decide to have kids and it may not be in our future. And sometimes we change our mind, and sometimes we're going to have conflicts with our partner on this decision. And in effect, it can be all really complicated, and even more so than we sometimes anticipate. And today we are talking about all those things and more. I'm talking with Rachel Honeyman, who is a business owner who runs Honey Be Bold, where she and her team build bold brands and websites for mission-driven, female-owned service businesses. Rachel runs a podcast called Bold Women in Business and is an avid traveler, writer, martial artist, women's self-defense teacher, and bunny mom to Luna and Lupin. Rachel and her husband are childless by choice after an arduous infertility journey. And today you're going to hear not just about that journey, but everything leading up to it and the kind of life that Rachel is living today. Rachel, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to get right into it. You and I already have had much chit chat. Tell us, what do we need to know about you and who you are?
Well, I'm a Libra.
Amazing. I'm a Taurus. What does it mean?
I actually have no idea. I'm so not a horoscopes person, but I did just have a birthday this week. So
Yay,
that's the exciting part of that. Thank you. Yeah, I live in Long Island, New York with my husband and our 2 pet rabbits. They're crazy and adorable. And I run a branding and web design agency called Honey Be Bold, where I work with female entrepreneurs to help them kick ass in their businesses.
Awesome. Perfect intro. And I got to say, I saw one of your bunnies today on Instagram and it was pretty cute.
I think it was cute.
Like a bunny backside photo of it looking out the window. Does that?
Yes. She, I let her out of her pen in the mornings and she just goes zoomies and she loves looking out the window. It's very cute.
Aw. That's amazing. And there's people listening who I'm sure have, I call a rabbit to me is like, or a bunny is sort of an uncommon pet as far as cats and dogs are kind of the standards. But I get messages and talk to people all the time. I had actually 2 women in a row the other week. Shout out to you two if you're listening, if you know who you are, who both had 2 birds. I think one of them maybe even had more than 2. And I was like, I mean, yes, I know people love birds, but I got photos sent to me. I could hear them singing. So it was very lovely.
It's definitely not the most common. I actually would get a dog in a heartbeat, but my husband is allergic and also just not a big fan of dogs. So bunnies were our compromise. I know. Okay. That's what he thinks.
Hypoallergenic dogs. That's what he thinks. You and I will talk offline later. But yeah, same situation. My husband was reluctant and now he's like the crazy dog person, even crazier than me. So, okay. Well, you have quite a story, Rachel, and it's got multiple parts to it. Quite a journey you've been on where it concerns this kids or child-free decision. So why don't we start at the very beginning? I'm curious to know, when you were young, when you were a child or a girl growing up, did you want to have kids? Was that a desire that you had?
So it's a funny question because it was kind of just an assumption. I grew up very Orthodox Jewish. I'm still an Orthodox Jew, but I'm modern. But I grew up ultra Orthodox. And so that's just part of the culture, right? People have big families. I grew up in a very big family. And it was just kind of the expectation. And so I think that I just assumed that I would have kids, but I never wanted to have a big family. I kind of always said, I'll have one and see how it goes, and then and then kind of go from there. But I never had like a very strong maternal instinct as a kid. And then when I met my husband, I was basically still a kid. I was 20 years old when we met. So that feels like 100 years ago now, but I was barely an adult, and we met, and he told me that he was never planning on having kids. And it really threw me. And I said, okay, well now it had never even occurred to me that this was a thing that you could think about and that you could like make a different choice.
Yeah.
So when he kind of introduced that, I really sat with that and gave it some thought. And I was like, I never had that like maternal drive. I think maybe I don't want to have kids. And so that was really kind of my position for a long time, was I don't want to have kids. That's not the path that I want to take.
Yeah.
And so we were really kind of on the same page with that when we got married and, kind of in our relationship.
I'm curious, in those early days, I mean, of course, we're getting like the synopsis kind of brief summary of things. Was there a point where you thought like, maybe this isn't the person for me? Or like, was that something tough for you to come to terms with? Or were you like, oh yeah, okay, well, like I want to be with you, and I guess I don't have to have kids. So that's that.
I definitely had a moment, probably more than a moment. It threw me, and I did kind of think like, well, I don't know what this means. I don't know how to think about this. But because I was 20 when we met, and I wasn't thinking about getting married, I wasn't thinking about, building a life with him per se. I was just kind of like, we're having fun. We're 20,
or you were 20. Yeah.
I was 20. He is 7 years older than me, but we really were not kind of in that phase. And so I was like, we'll just keep having fun. This is fun. And then the more I thought about that question, the more I kind of landed on this idea that I didn't actually want that path that everyone took.
Yeah. I'm curious at that point, like, what was a response from people in your life and family? Like, was there this expectation or pressure that you would be having kids, and therefore you deciding not to was an affront to your upbringing, your culture, your religion? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So I didn't talk to too many people about it at that time. There were like some close friends who knew. I don't even think I talked to my family about it per se. I'm not really so close with my family. So it wasn't something that I really invited them into that decision. But anyone who I did tell, who was kind of from my world, really did not take so well to it. People, some people were, actively kind of not nice about it, but most people were just kind of like, they didn't believe me. They said, oh, that's not real. You're going to change your mind. And that was kind of the common refrain was, oh, you'll change your mind. You'll see when you're in your late 20s, you're going to start feeling differently. And I was like, fuck you. Like, you don't know. You can't tell. I'm sorry. Can I say that on your podcast?
Yeah, you can. You definitely can. Yeah.
But I was
like, guest to ask either.
But I was like so offended by the very idea that people thought that they could understand this very personal decision.
Yeah. I like some of the language you used there a couple of minutes ago, which was, I didn't invite them into the decision. And I realize it's not always so simple for people, where it's like, people are going to have their opinions. And obviously, it depends on the nature of your relationships with people. But I want to highlight that just as some food for thought for people is like, who are you inviting into this decision? And ultimately, whose decision is this? I'm sure I have my thoughts and opinions on this, but it's worth thinking about. So, okay. So when did you and your husband get married then? How old were you at that point?
So I was still very young. I was 23. I was only a couple of years later. Yeah. But I still thinking back, I'm like, I was a baby. but yeah, I was 23 and Svi is my husband. He turned 30 the day after our wedding. So we got married really still with that as being on the same page, that kids were not in the cards for us. And we were going to build a life together that didn't include kids.
Yeah. And then what happened? You changed your mind. They were right.
And then
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, all those people were right, which was so frustrating for me because I am so a like march to the beat of my own drum person, and it was really not a fun decision to come to say like, oh, they were right.
Yeah.
But when I was about, I think it was 27, 28, maybe even 29. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but
yeah,
something just started to shift for me. I started to find myself looking at my friends' kids and actually having some like interest in, I had never like, when my friends had babies, I never really cared to like hold the baby. It just wasn't a thing that I was so drawn to. And I just started to look at kids differently. And then it was a long process. So I'm gonna say it was probably when I was about 27 was when that first glimmer started to shift in my head. And then I started to talk to Tzvi about it. He was actually much more ambivalent. He remains ambivalent, to be honest, even after our whole story, which at the end of this episode, you'll probably maybe look back and say, how is he still ambivalent after going through all that? I don't know. Yeah. But it's complicated as you know, as your listeners know. So he really remained ambivalent, and it wasn't necessarily something and ambivalence doesn't mean he was opposed to it. He just didn't feel strongly in either direction, right? That's true ambivalence. So yeah, it took some time for us to even come to the decision that we were ready to actually take action on this and, go forward with trying to have a child.
I just want to ask you briefly, like, I think we can be so hard on ourselves when we change our minds. And part of it is that sort of narrative or feeling of like, they were right. And this is what people have been telling us or telling me. And I think especially as somebody, I mean, we all, especially the people listening to this, I know have that kind of fierce independent streak. And yet sometimes, I'll give you a side example. I was really reluctant to get married. And Chris and I decided to get married largely for bureaucratic reasons, as unromantic as that sounds. And I was really dragging my heels, even though I knew that getting married would like make our life a lot easier. And part of it was me feeling like I don't necessarily, it's not that I don't respect, but I don't necessarily subscribe to this like institution of marriage. We have a great relationship without it, et cetera, et cetera. Probably trying to, I guess, be a bit contrary just because, and also there wasn't a need up to then to get married. And I remember my mom saying to me, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I realized that what would make me happiest was getting married, not because marriage was suddenly going to make me happy, but it would give me an easier life. It would give me access to that visa. Why not be married? And yet I was really digging my heels in and wanting to be right because I wanted to prove that point that like, no, I'm not the kind of person who gets married. I'm not like everyone else or whatever was going on there. So to go back to you after my little sidebar story, like how were you able to contend with changing your mind, and were those feelings coming up for you? And if so, how did you deal with a sense of like, they were right after all?
It actually probably wasn't as difficult as I'm making it sound now. Yeah. I kind of look back and I'm like, oh, damn it, they were right. But I think that it happened pretty organically. If I'm thinking back and remembering correctly, I think that it kind of happened organically, and it was something that happened over time. And I don't remember really feeling so. I don't remember being so hard on myself about it. Yeah. Is the short answer. Yeah. I think that, there's a part of me that probably is like, oh, I hate, feeling like I'm conforming, but, similar to you. But I think that I really did give myself that space to come to that decision.
Yeah.
And then I am such a, I'm such a type A personality. When I set my mind to something, I am going for it. So once that shift really kind of came to fruition and I said, okay, yes, this is the path that I want to take. Tzvi was on board. Mm-hmm. Now this became like my mission. Okay. I want to be a mother, and I'm going to pursue that.
Okay. And so in your mind at that point, it was kind of like, we've decided to have kids. Let's go. Now I will have children. Was that sort of your thinking? And then is that what happened?
That was my thinking. That is definitely not what happened.
Yeah. Okay.
We wound up having a very, very difficult road. We had some suspicions pretty early on that Svi had some fertility issues based on his blood work and some symptoms, but we decided to start pursuing this anyway. I had an IUD. I removed the IUD. We started that process, and then we got confirmation of his infertility very shortly after, starting the process. Yeah. So we knew that this was not going to be the easiest road, and initially we said, if we do in fact have fertility problems, we're not going to go down the IVF road, because we've seen, friends of ours, we've seen how difficult it is. We know that it really is going to put a strain on the relationship and on us. And we're not pursuing this we're not going to miraculous endeavors to try to make this happen. But once we had decided that this was the path that we wanted, and IVF was the only possible option, that really kind of set that snowball in motion.
Yeah. I just have to be so grateful that you're sharing all this with us, because I think what you're describing is something first of all, we know that fertility struggles are very common. Also, I appreciate you giving voice to the fact that, at least initially, and I know we'll hear more, but these were challenges on your husband's side, because for people who are listening, I think 50% of infertility cases, it does pertain to the man. And that's not as a placing blame thing, but we often put this on women. It's this is our responsibility, our domain. And so if you're interested, listeners, I'll link it in the show notes, but we have a great episode all about fertility stuff. The fertility rules you need to know is the name of the episode. But I appreciate you speaking about this, because I think from the outside, so many people have had the thoughts and gone through the process that you have, where first of all, and lots of the people who are listening and who I talk to, they are at a point in life where either they already know that there may be fertility challenges, or they're at an age where they realize it's likely. And yet I still think there's so many people who are right, my big hurdle is making this decision. And then if I decide to have kids, that's what I do. And they forget that that's just a decision. That's not necessarily what's going to happen and how things are going to play out. The second thing is, I think a lot of people expect that if, to your point, if it doesn't work, we just won't pursue that route. So I've talked to so many people, my husband and I had that same conversation. I think if it came to IVF, should we have decided to have kids, we wouldn't go down that road. And yet I think it's really hard once you have set your mind about something and your heart to say, okay, we're going to stop there. And so, was there a point where you thought, okay, we're not going to do this? Or was it yeah, no, of course, now we're going to do IVF? Can you just share a little bit about where you were at with all that?
Yeah. There were so many different points along the way. I think before deciding to go through our first round of IVF, once it became clear that that was our only option, then it became it's not even a consideration to not do it. Yeah. We had decided we want to be parents. While my husband was still ambivalent, but this was something that we had decided together that we were going to pursue. And for all those years that I didn't have that maternal instinct, I really had kind of developed it, and I really had developed that maternal yearning. And so it really was not even a question that we were going to go through the first round.
Okay.
There were questions about some of the subsequent rounds, and especially our last round. We wound up going through 4 rounds of IVF. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I don't think we need all the gory details
No, I don't want to make you relive that either.
So we wound up going through 4 rounds of IVF. Our third round ended in a chemical pregnancy, which is basically a very early miscarriage. Mm-hmm. And after going through that, to be frank, it broke me. That experience really broke me. And I really didn't feel like I could go through another round. And at that point, Svi really was the one who pushed for us to do another round of IVF. And, for better or worse, that's what we went through. And it was not successful. And we wound up going through one more round with donor eggs. So I didn't have to go through the egg retrieval process. And I'll share some more details in a minute about kind of how we kind of came to our ultimate decision to stop pursuing this. But yeah, I think it's not binary, right? I think that's kind of the real point of what I'm trying to say here is that it's not binary. It's not like, are we going through IVF or are we not going through IVF? I personally have friends who've gone through 9 rounds of IVF, and I've heard of other women who've gone through many, many more than that, people. And then there are people who can't go through more than one, or people who can't go through one at all, right? Everyone kind of has their own decision point. And it's not like I'm going through IVF or I'm not going through IVF. There are so many decision points along the way. So yeah, I think that the first round, there was no question. But I think every round after that, there were questions, and we took some more time between rounds, and some were closer together, and it just kind of, each one was a decision point in and of itself.
Yeah. Are you comfortable sharing just sort of how that, like what that impact was both on you personally and also that dynamic between you and your husband? I mean, especially hearing, and I'm guessing with, the ambivalence, and then he had more confidence, and you were like, I can't do this anymore. Like, did that cause strain between the two of you, or were you able to like uphold one another amongst all this, or was it kind of both?
We are an open book about this. So I do feel comfortable sharing that we were not able to support each other through this. We were going through such different experiences, and this is very common with couples going through these treatments. The experience is so different for the woman who's having to go through the hormone shots and the egg retrieval, and all of it is just such a strain on the woman, and the man is going through his own struggles, right? Or the partner who's not going through IVF, whatever the makeup is, right? I in our case, my husband was going through, this was difficult for him in its own right, but it was such a different experience that we really were not able to support each other through it, because we were going through such separate grieving processes at the same time. And it did put a lot of strain on our relationship. And frankly, it's something that we're still kind of working our way back from, because we were in that stage of life for almost 5 years. So it really took a toll going through, each round that we went through, and each part of that process really took a toll. And so it's something that's probably going to take us quite a bit of time to work our way back from.
Yeah. How did you know, or how did you two decide that enough was enough? It was time to close the door.
So it actually happened. So when you go through IVF, and if you have an episode that goes through kind of the details of it, I won't go through so many of the details.
Not in so much detail. So share as much as you want to, but only as it pertains to what you want to share.
Yeah. So I'll give a very short IVF lesson. So basically, a typical round of IVF is the woman has to go through, hormonal treatments to produce more eggs and basically promote the growth of follicles in the ovaries. And then they go in and surgically, I mean, it's a minor surgery, it's an outpatient surgery, but they are actually going in and retrieving as many eggs as they can from those follicles. And so when they take the egg, then they take the sperm. In our case, because we were dealing with a very, very small number of sperm that had to be surgically removed, surgically extracted. So we had a very, very limited number of sperm to deal with. So they use a process called ICSI, where they take a single sperm and they combine it with a single egg. Wow. And they hope for the best. So they create these, they create an embryo, and then the embryo has to grow to a certain stage. And then, before it's able to be transferred into the uterus. What we did, this is an optional thing. Not everyone does this. I think probably most people do this now. There's really advanced genetic testing that they can do on the embryo itself. And so when it matures to day 4 or 5, they can actually test the embryo and see, is this a healthy, viable embryo that, we can then transfer. Our issue was that we were unable to create a healthy, viable embryo. All 4 rounds of IVF, we had the same result where, in some different rounds, we created a different number of embryos that were able to mature to day 4 or 5. Not many in any case, but in all cases, we were unable to create an embryo that was healthy enough to transfer. And so the decision point was, after our 4th round of IVF, our doctor called me and said, the lab that did the genetic testing on your embryos just came out with a further level of testing where they can actually determine, where did the genetic abnormality come from? Is it coming from the sperm or from the egg? And we assumed for all this time that we were dealing with male infertility, which we were. We were dealing with male infertility. Yeah. We knew that there was a problem there. We assumed that even though they were able to extract some sperm from Tzvi, that probably it just wasn't healthy. Like that had to be the issue. Yeah. And they were always able to get a good number of eggs from me. I was young. I was, all things considered, everything looked like it was probably an issue on the sperm side. When they did this further level of genetic testing, they determined that actually my eggs were responsible in quotes, right? But my eggs were really the juncture where things were breaking down. Yeah. And so that was really like a light bulb moment for me, where I said, I cannot put my body through this again. This is like, we're really just, doing this again and again and again, and we're never going to get a better result. So that really kind of cinched it for me in terms of like, I am not personally going through another round of IVF. Then we did another round with donor eggs. That was kind of why we decided to do a round with donor eggs. Because again, we had like a certain number of vials of sperm from Tzvi, and he, as ambivalent as he was and remained, he was much more open to having a child that was genetically his, which I think is very common. People kind of have, there's a reason that people don't just adopt, right? Like people want to have a child that's theirs genetically. And so I was really fine with having a child that was not mine genetically, but he really didn't have that same drive. And he really did want to try, he said, we have these vials of sperm. I don't want to just give up. So we did a round with donor eggs, and we had the same result where they were unable to create a healthy embryo. So that just kind of signaled to us that, all right, we've got a problem on the sperm side. We've got a problem on the egg side. Like, this just ain't happening. Like, it's just not happening. And that really kind of closed it for us, where we said, like, we're not going to continue down this road. We did think about other paths like adoption or, embryo donation or things like that. And at this point, honestly, my mental health was in such shambles. I was really, really not in a good place. And I just said, I don't think that I can handle starting that process. And, it's no less of a toll on on you, like to go through, you go through the same thing of false hopes and dashed dreams. And, I couldn't go through the roller coaster.
Yeah.
So that was really where we kind of came to that decision.
I appreciate what you said about like, there's so many different decision points, right? There were so many decisions within this decision, and that discernment of when is enough, do we go forward, to what degree, I think is so unique. And I don't really think you can know until you're in it. And then I guess it really requires like personal discernment and checking in with yourself. And I mean, it sounds like things were such that you hardly had to check in. You knew you were just, like you say, you were broken effectively through this experience. How many years ago was this, and how are you doing today?
So we officially stopped in. Actually, we got the news about the donor egg cycle failing in May of 2022. We were in Norway at the time. So that nice put a damper on our, right. So I always remember the date because of that. And then, the decision to like officially close the doors probably happened within a month or so after that. But that was kind of the point when everything kind of stopped. So we're talking about 2.5 years ago. I'm doing much better now, much better. But it's a journey. It's really a journey. I think that for the first year to year and a half, really, definitely the first year after we, closed the doors, I've always struggled with depression and anxiety, basically my whole life. And I don't think I have ever been in as dark a place as that year following that decision point. It was really, really just an awful, awful time. I've lost people close to me. I've gone through grieving processes. I'm not like unfamiliar with that, but this was it was just a different experience that is hard to explain to people unless they've gone through it themselves. It really, really took a toll, and it took a lot of work to get myself to the point where I can say today, I'm really doing well. Like I still have those moments where it's very sad. It's very, I still feel that loss. I still, like I mentioned, we're still living in an Orthodox community. And so I'm surrounded by kids and like all the time. And our community is so family focused, and it's a beautiful, wonderful thing that I love. And it's incredibly painful. But for the most part, I'm doing really well.
I got to say that having a podcast is kind of a wild thing. I mean, being on the internet at all and having any sort of voice or presence is kind of crazy, because I'm standing here at my kitchen table. It's a Thursday afternoon. I've got my dog at my feet. And when this episode goes live, I will have thousands of people listening to what I have to say, which is just kind of hard to capture, let's say. And so I was thinking about, like, what would I like these thousands of people to know about? What do they need to hear about? How can I support them this week? What do I want to share? And I thought to myself, all of you, unless you're self-employed, have jobs. You work for perhaps small or large companies, organizations, etc. And I am very interested in bringing the Kids or Child-Free workshop, which I've been running for individuals over the last couple of years. I would love to start offering that to companies who are wanting to support their people in unique and forward-thinking ways. Now, we know that there are organizations who offer mental health support, for example, or who perhaps will support women in their organization if they're pursuing, or families if they're pursuing fertility treatments. We're helping people in new ways. Again, not all companies, but if you're the sort of innovative, forward-thinking, supportive organization, why not think about helping your people who are stuck with this biggest of life's questions, to be able to offer a resource to them? And that's why I'd love to see about how we can team up, and I can offer this workshop to select people on your team, people in your organization who are struggling with this decision. I don't know exactly how we would do this, what this would look like, but I do know that I've run this workshop for the last couple of years with great success, have given people a lot of new, fresh insights and perspectives to help them with their decision. And I'd love to start bringing this to new audiences through various organizations and companies. So if this is something that you might be interested in for your team or for your people, I will include my email in the show notes of today's episode. You can also definitely reach out to me via Instagram in the DMs. The two of us can have a chat and see how we can team up and go about supporting your people with the kids or child-free decision. Now, if you are an individual who is also interested in attending one of these workshops, you're like, hold on, I don't want to have to wait for you to offer this through companies. I host these workshops every month. I will also include the link to the workshops in the show notes of today's episode so that you can sign up for one of our upcoming dates. I'm curious what some of the things have been that have been helpful or healing for you, aside from the passage of time, which I just want to say, like 2.5 years is not that long for anyone who's experienced any kind of loss. And I mean, I've not experienced that. Like you say, it's something totally unique, but you know, even as an example, my dad died 6 years ago. I mean, it feels like 6 years and it feels like 6 months. Like I think when something is, when it like is raw and touches you in that way, I think it always in some ways will feel that way. So I, again, like really appreciate you sharing all of this with us so candidly. What's been important or helpful for you along that path?
Therapy is amazing.
Big fan
really,
of therapy.
Yeah, big fan. I'm very, very grateful. I've had the most incredible therapist who has seen me through really this whole process.
Yeah. Are they someone who specializes in that, by the way? Sorry to interrupt. I'm just like, is this a topic that they're well-versed in, or has it just been a really great supportive therapist who's been able to help see you through this?
So she happens to have a lot of experience with this. Mm-hmm. I don't think I sought her out because of that. It just kind of happened to, it happened to work out that way, that she has a lot of experience with this. But I do think that if this is something that, you know, someone is going through infertility struggles, I would recommend, you know, working with someone who is really, really well-versed in this, because I actually had gone to a couple of different therapists, and I did have a hard time really getting the support that I needed from those therapists. Looking back, like the therapists who really didn't have experience with this whole world of infertility. Yeah. So yeah, therapy is definitely number one. I actually wound up going through this, and this is something that I haven't talked about so publicly yet, but I'm an open book. I wound up going through a treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's very uncommon in the US, but it's becoming more common. And it's an FDA approved treatment for treatment-resistant depression. So because I've gone through depression, you know, I've experienced depression throughout my life. I've tried medication. I've tried all those things, and they never really worked for me. And so I kind of looked into some alternative treatments. And this is, it's a treatment that uses magnets. It's not a fun treatment, I would say, but it is.
No.
No.
Does it hurt, or does it just feel weird?
So I think most people, it does not hurt per se. In my experience, it was very painful. Yeah. But from what I hear, that was unusual. But I think that it just, for some reason, it was just a very painful experience for me, but it was highly, highly effective. Oh, good. And it's something that I actually continue to do every, 6, 8, 10 months. It just is something that I am very grateful that I discovered. And I don't think that I would have discovered it had I not gotten to such a dark place. And so it's kind of like that, not that I am glad that I got to such a dark place, but I think that it's actually allowed me to be more, more functional, more effective, more just satisfied with life. And so I'm grateful for that.
Well, I'm sure listeners who are struggling with depression will be checking this out, hopefully. I don't know if there's maybe, we can check if there's a general body or if this is like a particular certified method we can link to in the show notes, but that sounds powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely worth checking out.
I want to hear, there's a couple things that I sort of know you for, if you will. One, of course, is we met through our respective businesses. And I'm interested, like, were you, and I think the answer is yes, a business owner before going through all of these struggles? And what's sort of that relationship been like with your business? Like, has it been extra hard being your own boss through all of this? Has it been like really supportive to the kind of time and space and healing you've needed? Like, what's that relationship or role been like, and how has that shifted?
Yeah. So actually I was technically a business owner in that I had a freelance on the side thing, I've been doing this for about 16 years, but I always was working for someone else. And I officially went out on my own, just under 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I actually was working for an employer, and not even just one. I switched jobs a couple of times in the middle of this. So I think I was very lucky to work in a very flexible type of work situation where I was able to, because when you're navigating IVF, besides for the mental health toll, it's just like you're having to go to, a million doctor's appointments, and it's a lot of disruption to your workday. And so I was very lucky to be in flexible environments while I was going through that. And I had understanding bosses and all of that. I went out on my own about 2 years ago. So it was really after kind of, I had made this decision, and it was really in the thick of some of the hardest times in my life. And I think that I always wanted to start my own business. That was always my goal, was to run my own business. And I think if anything, going through this was like the push that I needed to do this. It really made me re-examine my life and like what kind of life I wanted to build. And it also was so linked to this shift that had happened in me, where I really had this yearning to nurture. And that's still very, very present in me. And I really did fuel that into my business. That doesn't, that's not going to be the answer for everyone. But for me, that really was a very powerful thing to say, I have the ability to build something and nurture something and create something and kind of reinvent what I want my life to look like. And it's a very long process, and it's not simple or easy or clean cut. It's something that just takes time. And it's not a replacement, right? This is not a replacement for the child that I wanted to have, but it is a way of channeling that drive that I have, and getting that satisfaction of feeling like I am pouring my heart and soul into something and seeing the fruits of my labor.
That's super cool. Yeah, of course. I mean, a business is not a substitute baby or child. And yet we have energy and we have these desires. And like you say, you had this temperament and this need and desire to nurture, and to be able to pour that into something and to put your focus and your energies there, I think is really powerful. So I've enjoyed seeing you do it. And I look forward to like seeing how things unfold further. Which of course at the end, I know you've got a little something for any business owners in the crowd that you'll be sharing with us. I want to talk about the other thing that I know you for. And I see this a lot. I follow you on stories, and you're always inspiring me with your strength, because you are like the JiuJitsu queen, kicking butt is it a studio, a dojo? Where do we practice JiuJitsu?
A school, I guess you can call it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How and when did you get into that? And can you tell me like what kind of role has this played in your life?
Yeah. So I started JiuJitsu about 9 years ago. November 9th will be 9 years. So we're really close. Today is October 9th when we're recording this.
That's super cool.
So it's coming up on 9 years. So long before I had started the fertility journey, but kind of coincidentally around the same time that we were really actively talking about pursuing parenthood. And it has played such a pivotal role in so many parts of my life. And JiuJitsu is just one my primary martial art, but I practice a couple of other martial arts as well. And my focus is really on realistic self-defense. So I have a little bit of a different focus than some of my colleagues who are, and some of my peers in the JiuJitsu school who are, really focused on the sport. I really kind of bring in a little bit more of that self-defense oriented, realistic self-defense oriented approach. And for me, it became very important to me a long time ago, about 10 years ago, after I had a scary incident. Someone had followed me back to my car, and thank God I got away from that situation, physically unscathed. But it really was an eye-opening experience for me where I said, I need to know how to defend myself and how to get myself out of a situation if I'm faced with one. And so that became my focus. And the last bunch of years, I've been teaching women self-defense. And so it's really, really important to me. And as I was going through the fertility struggles and since going through the fertility struggles, when you're going through when you're going through IVF, I can't speak for other things that people go through, but when you're going through IVF, it's so common to feel like your body is just not your own, right? Like my body was taken over by hormone injections and then the hormones like coursing through my body, and I felt swollen and bloated, and like I just felt like a science experiment. Like that's kind of how you feel, and you just don't feel like yourself. And I couldn't train. I couldn't do my martial arts while I was going through each cycle. I had to take off a month or 2 months sometimes at a time, which is very hard for me because this is such an important part of my life. But every time I kind of came back to it, it just felt like this is like a way of taking back control of my body. But it really actually was very hard. It took time. It took me quite a while until I was like, after going, I was post IVF, right? My post IVF life is really when I kind of started reconnecting with my body. Like it really took some time. I would say a good 6 months or so after going through my last round of IVF until I really felt like, okay, like my body is mine. I have control over this. I can, set the course, and like this is a way of like really feeling empowered in my own body. And then, I really did channel that into like empowering others as well.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I think, certainly I'm guessing that journey of like coming back into and finding peace in your body is one that many or most will have to navigate if they've gone through IVF, but to have this real like kind of stark contrast or opposition of something so physical and like giving you that control and ability to defend yourself, to me, there's something really powerful in that. So it's very inspiring to see and to hear about.
Thank you.
I have a question that I got from somebody just in the last 24 hours, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but I'm curious to get your take on it because I gave her my 2 cents, but I think you'll be able to relate a little bit more. And effectively what she said is, she said, I'm realizing that the only real likelihood of me having kids would be through infertility treatments. She said, the thing is, I'm on the fence about whether or not I want to have kids. So I'm not sure how hard, I think was the word she used, I want to go forward, if at all, with fertility treatments. And she was sort of wondering, first of all, do I have any resources or thoughts for her in terms of how she might approach that? And again, I shared a few things with her, but I'm curious what advice, I always like to think I'm not in the advice giving business, but maybe just considerations she might have if she's still on the fence about kids and also thinking, okay, I'd have to go down the fertility treatment path. Should I have children?
This is a tough one because it's so personal. I will tell you that, like, if I'm super honest, which I tend to be, that's my MO.
Don't disappoint us, Rachel.
My real honest answer is, and I say this to my husband all the time, like, I wish on many, many, many levels, probably most levels, I wish that switch had never been flipped for me. Like, I wish that I had just never started to have that maternal yearning, because obviously we can't change what happened, right? And regret doesn't do anything positive for us, right? Yeah. And it's not that I'm like living my life with regret, but it's more, if I had known what I know now, I don't think that I would have gone down this infertility journey, right?
Yeah.
But it's easy to say that knowing the outcome, right? Like, if I had wound up with the child that I wanted, I would probably say the complete opposite. I would say, thank God I went down this path. So I think it's so personal. And I don't think it's something that's like easy to really answer, but I think that the important thing is, for someone who is feeling ambivalent, I think that making that decision, like deciding, is this something that I really want, is the first point.
Yeah.
Because you can't, I think that going through IVF is hard, and it takes a toll. Like, no matter who you are, it's not an easy path. And so going down that without being sure, like, this is what I want, is really tough. And then, obviously my husband did that, right? Like, he went down this path without being totally sure. And I think that he kind of feels the same way that I do. I think that he would also say, I wish that we hadn't gone down this path. Obviously, again, once that door was opened, it's really hard to close it.
Pandora's box.
It's Pandora's box. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's really, really hard to close it. And I don't think that anyone should necessarily try to close it. Like, if that is the path that feels right to you and is calling to you, like, don't try to close that door. Like, it's, that there's no need to. I'm in a kind of unique position, I guess. Probably not. There probably are people like me as well, but I haven't met any, but who are, I kind of went from not wanting to have kids to wanting to have kids to going down this fertility path to, choosing. I did make a choice to close that door again. Right. And there are plenty of people that I talk to now. You asked me earlier in our conversation, how did people in my life react when I told them that I wasn't planning on having kids? I think that if anything, maybe just because I'm more open about it, I get a lot more people now who say to me, well, you can't, like, they can't handle the idea of this story not having a happy ending.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, maybe you should try adopting. Maybe you should try whatever, and they make these suggestions that is really are really not helpful. Right. No. But they're also very, they just don't understand the total picture of what led me to this decision. But it was a decision. And sure, there are always other paths available, but this was the path that was right for me and for my husband. So
yeah.
Certainly
your story is very unique. And I think these stories are so important to hear. And actually I had a similar but different conversation with Katie Seppi from Childless Collective, who had a similar story arc as far as, I think she was more ambivalent than not wanting kids, but her husband didn't want them. She was kind of like, okay, whatever. Similarly, decided they did want children, or she wanted children, went through the infertility route and then or fertility treatments, and then also decided to stop. And we talked about the fact that like all of these stories, and it's really quite a harm that I don't want to say the industry does broadly, but this idea that like every story ends with a baby and that you keep going at all costs to the nth degree forever and ever more. And there's something empowering in saying, I'm not okay. I can't do this anymore. And again, for her, it looked different, but it was similarly like, she was like, I can't, I just cannot anymore. And these are, I think we need to hear more about this and similarly all the decisions along the path, because as I always say to people, it's so rarely kids or child free. It's like, kids trying at age 42 or child free, or kids on my own or child, like there's so many different paths that our stories take, and it's complicated. It's not just a straightforward decision. It's many smaller and bigger decisions. So, I also, Rachel, like I kind of wanted to ask you, like, knowing what you know now, would you have necessarily gone down that path? Because I heard someone share this, her name, and I'll see if I can find the post to link in the show notes. But her name, she's I think a Substack or Medium. I think she's on Medium. Her name's Charlie Brown, is at least her writing name. I think that's her name. I don't know if that's her real name, but she said something similar where she said, having been through this, I kind of wish I hadn't decided yet. Yes, I think she'd also been on the fence, and that's also a tough question to ask, because as you say, you have the benefit of hindsight. It's for you not to have tried. Let's say you knew there may have been fertility struggles and you didn't pursue that, and you just sat with that desire. That can also lead to this feeling of, what if I could have been a mom? What if I would have tried? So I agree with what you're saying as far as like, you can't give definitive advice, but I also think you did a good job. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And it wasn't very different than what I shared, because I say, on the one hand, I don't think we can disentangle our desire from our circumstances, like, because we always imagine like we feel in the context of how our lives are, right? Like saying to a single person, well, would you have kids if you're in a relationship? It's like, well, but I'm not in a relationship. So it's hard for me to like think about things being as they are. Yeah. And yet, as best as possible, to think about that future of, do I really want and see this life with a child, and to what degree? It's not an on-off switch. And I think you also kind of alluded to that with some of this, that it's like, it's not one stopping point or a yes and a no. It's like, it's a gradient or a process we go through, and many yeses and nos. And so attuning yourself with that desire, the strength of that desire, it may be something like your husband, it may be something like yourself, then making decisions. What are you going to do about the desire? That's the second piece. But I agree. I think going into, especially something from everything I've heard about how much turmoil and pain there can be with fertility treatments, is not having that certainty. I think it's going to put you in an extra tough place, probably.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's something that shouldn't be taken lightly. That's really, and that I think is one of the frustrations for anyone who's dealing with any type of fertility issue, is that you're going to hear from someone in your life, if not many people in your life, they're going to say, oh, just do IVF or just adopt or right. They make light of these decisions. And that's really what I would say is like, kind of coming back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation of like, who do you invite into these decisions? Like really understand that it's your decision to make. It's your decision, your and your partner's decision. If you have a partner, like this is something that is very personal, and I think very important to feel empowered to make that decision yourself, and to know that whatever decision you make is not wrong, right? Like it's just you make whatever decision you make, and if that is the path that you decide to take, then we are very lucky to live in a time when we have the technology to pursue parenthood, even with fertility struggles. Like it's an incredible thing. And, when I said earlier, like I felt like a science experiment, like in some ways that was really cool. Like, it was really cool to be like, oh my God, like someone who lived 100 years ago could never have experienced something like this. It's really, really incredible. But it's also a very big toll on your body, your mind, your relationships, like, and it's something that needs to be considered very carefully.
Okay, so I have another question for you, and it sort of stems from a personal experience that I had, or perhaps I want to watch my words here. Maybe less than something that's happened, something that I felt, and that is knowing, I'm sure many people, but person or persons in particular who've been struggling with fertility challenges and to conceive and have a child for quite some time now. Being a person who both has been on the fence, who supports people on the fence, who is a child-free by choice person. And this is maybe a reading between the lines thing, but I sometimes wonder if my position, if you will, in speaking about these things is in some ways like a bit of an affront or triggering to people who are going through these challenges. And I realize you can't speak for everyone, but I'm curious, like other people who are on the fence or other people who are child-free, maybe outspoken about it. Was that difficult for you to contend with? Was that even in your view at all when you were going through all of this?
I think that when I was actively going through it, I probably would have found that kind of triggering. And it's probably something that I'm pretty mindful of, like, not, I will just unfollow accounts if they're posting things that are triggering to me. Like, I am personally of the belief that, like, I'm responsible for protecting myself. I don't think anyone else's responsibility to, like, not trigger me if that, like, people are going to talk about what they're going to talk about. But now it's definitely not triggering for me. I think that I'm in a place where I can just say, like, this is such a personal journey, and, everyone has their personal journey. And I have been open about our fertility struggles almost the entire time that we've been going through this. And I've written a bunch of articles and all of that. And whenever I have written about this, I've really been as mindful as possible to say, to frame it as all of these choices are valid. Like, when I was in that phase of, I'm not looking to be a mother, I'm not looking to have children, like, that wasn't my plan. That was a perfectly valid and real place to be. I'm glad that, I didn't, take any steps to prevent myself from having children at that point, because my feelings changed. But it was a very valid and real position to have. And so that's basically my philosophy on this, is that, like, if someone is, doesn't want to have children or decides that that's not the path that's right for them, like, that I am respectful of that. And I think that it's just as valid as any other choice. So right now, where I'm at now, I don't find that triggering, but I think that probably when I was actively going through it, I would have found it, not disrespectful or anything like that, but just something that I wouldn't want to expose myself to at that time.
There probably are some people listening who are like, oh my gosh, she changed her mind. This is what I've been so worried about, right? Because people who are on the fence are worried that they're going to make a decision and then change their mind. And so you were, I will say, and this is not dismissive of you change your mind, but relatively young. And this is also PS, not dismissive of young people who know their minds to either have kids or not have kids. I want to be clear about that. But let's say if we're talking to somebody, I'm going to think about the average person in my audience. Let's say they're 34 years old. They've always been ambivalent and or leaning towards not having kids. Like, probably the answer is it's really personal, but, like, should people be worried they might change their mind? Do you think this is something that would happen at that stage? How much of your changing your mind do you think was sort of related to the stage of life you were in or were moving through?
So I think what I have learned more than anything, and I hope that this aligns with kind of how you approach things, but I think that changing your mind is like, shouldn't be such a scary thing. Like
Totally.
we change and evolve and grow. And if you are in the same place now as, as you are 20 years from now, like we've got problems, right? Like we should be changing our minds on things. And so I think that, kind of coming back to what I just mentioned, which is personally, I actually when I was in that stage of, I don't want to have kids, I actually considered getting a tubal ligation. Mm-hmm. It was, I felt so certain that I didn't want to have kids, that was something that I was considering. And I'm personally grateful that I didn't do that. Does that mean that people shouldn't take such steps? No, this is a totally very personal decision. But I think that people shouldn't be so afraid of like, okay, if I make a decision now, I am stuck with it forever. Yeah. Most decisions are not like that. Mm-hmm. The one decision that is kind of like that is if you choose to have a child, like that's a permanent decision, like you have a life to take care of, right? That's not something you can just go back on so easily. Nope. But I think that certainly in the other direction, like, yeah, you might change your mind at some point, or you might not. And like, it's okay. People change their minds. And it doesn't mean that the decision that you made and that you felt so certain about was wrong. It doesn't mean that it was fake or that you were immature, or like, it doesn't mean any of those things. It just means we grow and evolve, and sometimes our positions change on things.
I totally agree. I mean, I say it all the time. You're allowed to change your mind. I think we can use a relationship analogy. I mean, just because I was in love with and in a different relationship with someone in the past doesn't mean that was the wrong thing. I mean, in some cases, you might say, well, yeah, but at that point in my life, it was the right thing. And I remain grateful for at least most of those relationships. And yet I've changed and grown and evolved, and what I've wanted has changed. And I think we need to give ourselves permission for that. I think one of the biggest fears people have is this idea of like, what if I change my mind and it's too late and I'm not able to have kids? Now, it wasn't the reason why you weren't able to have kids, but I guess you've walked that path as far as like you did change your mind and you weren't able to. Do you have any words of hope or something to say to people who are worried about that happening, it being, quote, too late?
I mean, I think that even in that case, like it's rare. I'm not going to say it's never too late, right? Like if someone is, 75 and they wake up and they say, oh, I wish I had kids, like there's probably not anything that you can do about that particular thing at that point. But like, if you've gone through menopause, let's say, and you can't naturally have your own children, there are other paths if that is something that you want to pursue. Like that, and I think that people are aware that that's an option. There are other options. But I think that, something else that is important to keep in mind is that, again, it's not a replacement, but if someone has that, they wake up and they say, I really want to nurture something. I really want to nurture something. And I think I would want to nurture a child, but that's just not an option for me because, it's too late. Right? Whatever that means. Yeah. There are other ways to channel that. And I think that, it doesn't have to be a business, and it doesn't have to be martial arts. It doesn't have to, like, those are the things for me personally that were important, but everyone has to find their own path. And, I think that similarly, if someone doesn't, they decide firmly they don't want to have kids and they don't change their mind, like, you're going to find other ways to build meaning, right? Like we live in a very one-dimensional society, unfortunately, where it's like the only way that you build meaning, especially as a woman, is by being a mother. And there are like so many other ways to build meaning. And arguably, even if you're a mother, even if I had been successful in being a mother, like I would hope that I would have other paths of meaning, right? Like I wouldn't want to lose myself in that. So I think that that's just important to keep in mind too.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I have 5 rapid fire questions that I ask all my guests. So if you've listened before, you might know what they are. But otherwise, here they are. Now, the first 2 questions are finish this sentence. So the first one is, being child-free or childless not by choice is?
Hard.
Being childless or child-free not by choice is not?
The end of the story.
What is one tool or resource you think would be helpful for people who are on the fence about whether or not to have kids?
I should have thought of these before.
Nobody gets them before, so it's you can just say they should come talk to me. That's my favorite.
I am gonna say that.
I can.
Yeah, they should go talk to you, Keltie.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, next time I'll just prime my guests with that one.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't get paid extra for that, I promise.
Yeah. What is one thing that you would like moms to know? You
are a person with your own value and meaning and magic.
Magical answer. I love it. Okay. And lastly, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child-free, what would that piece of advice be?
Be mindful about who you invite into that decision.
Nice one. Good tie together. Rachel, you're a consummate guest. Thank you so much for coming on today, Rachel. Where can people find you? And I hinted that I think you said you have a little freebie or something that you want to share with people. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on my website, honeybeebold.com, on LinkedIn, Rachel Honeyman, on Instagram, honeybeebold. I'm all over the place. And I have a freebie for anyone in the audience who's a business owner, or even if you're not a business owner, I think it can be really valuable. I've created something I'm calling my bold, let's see if I can say it, Bold
Tongue
Brand
twister.
Blueprint. It's totally a tongue twister.
Bold Brand Blueprint 10 times. Okay.
Yeah, say that 10 times, and then it gets sent to you automatically. It's like a Beetlejuice situation. So it's basically a comprehensive guide to creating a messaging strategy for your brand. So whether you are running a business and are building a business brand, or you have a personal brand you're trying to build, it really helps you understand who your audience is and how to speak directly to them. So it's a really valuable resource, and you can find it at honeybeebold.com/Keltie.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm like one of these podcasters, like Rich Roll or somebody, one of these ones who's like, I wish I should have dropped a female podcaster there, but Liz Moody, they just drop the code Liz15 and you'll get 15% off of these probiotics. Exactly. Amazing. I love it. Oh my gosh. I'm curious if there's business owners who are going to go download that. You can tell me how much clout I have and if I should start getting advertisers.
Yeah. This is the moment of truth. I will let you know.
No pressure. I did tell a friend of mine who has, we'll call it like a somewhat sizable podcast, who's been at it for 2-3 years, where I'm at with my downloads. And she's like, that's incredible. She's like, it took me like 2 years to get to that. And I don't worry too much about these metrics, but maybe soon I too will have a partnership deal with Honeybee Bold or someone else.
Yeah. And actually that reminds me, I also have my own podcast, which Keltie has been a guest on. That episode hasn't aired yet, but it's called Bold Women in Business. So come check us out.
Very cool. Okay. Well, maybe people, when's that episode airing? Do you know? No pressure.
It's going to be a couple of weeks. I'm kind of a couple weeks behind, but but it's coming out probably in November.
Okay. Awesome. Mark your calendars, sign up for Rachel's emails. She sends some great branding tips and some personal stuff as well. You have some great fun shares. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, Rachel, for speaking so candidly, addressing the nuances and complexities of this, for sharing your story so honestly and beautifully. So really enjoyed our time together today.
Thank you so much. Always fun to chat with you.
Thank you for tuning in for this latest episode of the Kids or Child Free podcast. I hope you found that conversation insightful and valuable. And if you did, I have a special request to make. And that is, I would be so appreciative if you would go leave a review or a rating over on Apple Podcasts or leave us a rating on Spotify, both of which can be done via the Apple Podcast and the Spotify apps on your mobile device. If you go do that, that is going to be a huge help in helping the Kids or Child Free podcast get discovered by more listeners, more people like you who are on the fence seeking clarity with this decision. So hop on over. I mean, if you're listening on your device, you're probably there right now. It'll quite literally take you anywhere from like 10 to 20 seconds. Leave us a rating. Again, you can do that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Or if you're on the Apple Podcast app, you can also leave us a review with some kind words sharing what you think about this podcast and why you suggest other fence sitters should tune in. Thank you in advance for doing so, and I wish you a beautiful rest of your day.